Let's turn straight away to breaking news from the US, because around a dozen documents marked as classified have been found at the former US Vice-President Mike Pence's Indiana home last week. The classified records have been turned over to the FBI. So let's head straight to Washington, straight to Gary O'Donoghue, who's across these developments as they come in. And Gary, tell us more.
Well, I don't know, Matthew, if you remember, but a couple of weeks ago we talked about Joe Biden having left classified documents in his garage with his sports car. And we mused at the time how many other people, how many other senior politicians would be going through their garages and their outbuildings looking for the same thing. Well, whoops-a-daisy, here's the vice president who's just left office, having found a dozen documents at his home in Indiana. So here we have a sort of pattern developing here, I think, of senior politicians, in some cases absent-mindedly, in some cases perhaps more deliberately, leaving office with a bunch of stuff they shouldn't have.
Do we know much about the nature of the documents?
We don't. We know there are about a dozen of them. We know that they were at his home in Indiana. We know that he's handed them over to the FBI and the Justice Department and the National Archives, and an investigation is continuing. I will say that Mike Pence has been repeatedly asked whether he has any documents at home, and in several interviews right since last summer he said he hasn't. So someone didn't check carefully enough before he gave those assurances. What this does do is give the Justice Department a huge headache, because if you remember, they came out pretty quickly when the details about Joe Biden's discoveries came out, and appointed a special counsel, desperate to seem even-handed with what had happened to Donald Trump and his documents. They can't keep on appointing special counsels every time someone finds something. So I think there may be some pressure to roll Mike Pence's issues into the same investigation that's going on into Joe Biden's. And that, of course, would be fantastic for the president, because it would dilute the focus on his problems with these documents.
A quick final thought, because you've gone through the roll call. It's Donald Trump, it's Joe Biden, it's now Mike Pence. So ultimately, what are the potential consequences here?
Well, there's something called the Presidential Records Act, which is a statute that governs what you should hand over once you leave office as president or vice president. That can have penalties connected to it. The case of Donald Trump is slightly different in that he's also facing potential charges of conspiracy and some potential charges under the Espionage Act, simply because of the way he handled the request for those documents once it became clear that he had them, resisting them. Subpoenas were granted, ended up with a search warrant, if you remember, of Mar-a-Lago. So there are qualitative differences between his case and that of Mike Pence and Joe Biden, who seem to have cooperated immediately and handed this stuff over and said sorry very quickly.